They told me I had two choices: accept a 50% pay cut or clear out my desk by Friday. What they didn't know was that the very product keeping the company afloat, the one they'd patented and profited from for years, was never really theirs. To begin with, I didn't want to play that card. I tried everything to stay quiet, to be fair. But when HR backed me into a corner, I revealed something that shook the company to its core and flipped the entire power dynamic overnight. Before all of this, I had no plans of making enemies. My name is Marcus Reid, and I'm an engineer. I've always preferred circuits and sketches over corporate meetings and office gossip. For the past 6 years, I worked at a mid-sized tech company called Noventa Dynamics, based in Austin. We weren't Google or Apple, but in our little corner of medical wearable tech, we were making real noise. Our flagship product, a microsensor that tracked early cardiac anomalies, had been picked up by 2 major hospital systems in the Midwest and was in negotiations for international licensing. That sensor? I designed it, not just the schematics. I built the first prototype in my garage long before I joined Noventa. Back then, it was just an idea I was obsessed with, something I toyed with on weekends and after hours. The early versions were clunky and inconsistent, but I kept refining them until I had something that could change lives. When I joined Noventa, it was under a handshake agreement with the founder, Russell Blake. He saw my potential, promised creative freedom, and hinted that my sensor would one day get the spotlight it deserved. I was young, trusting, and honestly, just thrilled someone believed in me. Within 2 years, the company began developing my sensor into a viable product. At first, I was thrilled. Seeing my design go from prototype to production was surreal. I spent long nights in the lab, refining the firmware, shrinking the housing, and troubleshooting feedback. We hit a few roadblocks, but eventually, it worked, and it worked beautifully. The day they secured the first major hospital deal, we popped champagne in the break room. I remember Russell raising his glass and saying, "To the brains behind the breakthrough." I was proud. I felt seen, but that feeling didn't last. As the company expanded, it brought in more investors, more executives, and more lawyers. Russell stepped back into a chairman role and handed daily operations over to a new CEO, a woman named Tara Mendez. She was sharp, polished, and efficient, but she didn't care about backstories or passion projects. To her, I was just another engineer with a decent resume. I noticed my input being cut out of key product meetings. My name was quietly removed from project summaries. Once, when I asked about presenting at an investor demo, she said bluntly, "We need someone with more stage presence." Still, I kept my head down. I figured that if I kept doing good work, someone would notice. I didn't make waves. I didn't mention the unsigned IP documents that had been casually floated to me 2 years earlier, but never followed up on. I didn't mention that the original patent filing, the one with my design's blueprint, had come from my personal LLC, created before I joined Noventa. I didn't say a word, even when I should have. Part of me didn't want to seem ungrateful. The other part believed that Russell would always have my back. Then, COVID hit. Like every other business, Noventa had to pivot, cut costs, and recalibrate. Sales dropped, especially in Q2. The office buzz turned anxious. We had virtual meetings, where department heads tried to keep morale up, but behind the scenes, layoffs had already begun. I survived the first 2 waves. Then, one Monday morning, I got the calendar invite, a 9:30 a.m. HR check-in with Tara and the HR director, Kyle. I should have known. The meeting was short, clinical, and cold. Tara didn't sugarcoat it. "We've decided to reduce your compensation by 50%, effective next pay cycle. Alternatively, if you choose not to accept the new terms, we understand and are prepared to accept your resignation." No discussion. No room for negotiation. Just 2 options: lose half my income or walk away. I was stunned. I asked, "Is this performance-related?" Kyle gave a scripted response. This is strictly a company-wide cost restructuring effort. Your role is being redefined. Redefined. That's what they called it. I remember walking out of that Zoom meeting in a daze. My laptop sat there, screen still glowing, mocking me. Half my income, gone, just like that. No warning, no acknowledgement of my contributions. 6 years of work, reduced to a line item in a spreadsheet. The worst part? They expected me to say thank you for even having a job. That evening, I sat in my apartment, looking over old emails, schematics, patent drafts, legal memos, a folder I hadn't touched in years, sensor design pre-Noventa, and for the first time in a long time, I looked at the ownership trail not through the lens of an employee, but through the eyes of a creator. And that's when I realized they didn't own me or my work the way they thought they did. What I did next would change the direction of the company forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The folder had been sitting untouched on my external drive for nearly 5 years. Labeled Sensor Design Pre-Noventa, it was just one of those things I kept out of habit. Like an old blueprint you frame but never hang. I had forgotten the details of what I'd saved. But that night, after HR's gut punch, I needed to remember who I was before I gave my best ideas to people who couldn't even look me in the eye when they slashed my salary in half. The files opened with a dull hum. PDFs. CAD drawings, design logs, testing notes. The earliest sketches were dated a year before I joined Noventa. I was still working freelance back then, doing odd jobs for a startup incubator, living off ramen and Red Bull in a studio apartment where the heating barely worked. But I was on fire creatively. That's when I built the first rough prototype of the microsensor, the one that would eventually evolve into Noventa's flagship product. What most people didn't know is that I had legally protected the idea early on. My mentor at the time, a retired bioengineer named Dr. Ayers, had drilled it into my head. File a provisional patent. Always. Even if it's ugly. Just timestamp the idea. And I did. I submitted a provisional patent under my own LLC, ReidTech, with all the core elements of the sensor documented. The power efficiency algorithm, the multi-node data sync, the biometric calibration matrix. All of it was there. When I joined Noventa, I mentioned the project to Russell. He was impressed and asked if I'd be willing to bring the design into the company's development pipeline. "We'll credit you. We'll give you equity when we go big," he promised. At the time, I was just grateful someone saw my vision. He told me legal would handle the transfer paperwork eventually. That day never came. Nobody followed up, and I never pushed, naively assuming Russell's word meant something. I hadn't thought much of it since. After all, we were growing. I was getting a decent salary. I figured once stock options came through, things would level out. But now, with half my paycheck gone and HR acting like I was disposable, those old promises felt like expired coupons. I scrolled through the file dates. One caught my eye, an email confirmation from the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. I had completely forgotten. I had upgraded the provisional patent to a full non-provisional filing just months before I joined Noventa. It had gone through, it was active, and still under my name. I froze. That meant, legally, my design was never fully transferred to Noventa. They had built their entire product around something they didn't officially own, and they didn't even know it. I sat back in my chair, heart thudding. The implications were massive. Their licensing deals, investor decks, technical sheets, all built on a product that, on paper, still belonged to me. One call to the right lawyer, and this could become a nightmare for them. But here's the thing. I didn't want to burn bridges. I didn't want to nuke the company. Despite everything, part of me still respected the vision we started with. So I called Russell. He picked up after 2 rings. "Marcus, been a while. Everything good?" I didn't dance around it. "Not really. I just had a meeting with HR. They're cutting my salary in half." Silence. "I didn't know that," he finally said. "Tara's handling ops now. She didn't loop me in." "Right," I said. "Look, I'm not calling to rant. I want to make you aware of something. Before this gets messy." I told him about the patent, the LLC, the file dates. I walked him through the documentation, step by step. To his credit, he didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he let out a slow, tired breath. "You're telling me the core IP we've been selling is technically still owned by Reid Tech?" "Correct." He was quiet again. "Jesus. I'm not trying to go nuclear," I said quickly. "But if the company's willing to gut my salary while profiting off something I created, I need to start thinking about protecting myself." Russell sighed. "Let me talk to legal. Give me 48 hours, please." I agreed. 2 days later, I got a calendar invite. This one wasn't from HR. It was from Russell himself. The subject line just said, "Let's fix this." But I already had a feeling. The moment I said the word patent, the tone had shifted. I had gone from expendable to a legal threat. The balance of power had quietly tilted. I wasn't looking for revenge. I wanted to be treated like a human being, like the guy who helped build the very product they were now slashing me out of. But something told me that the game had just started, and I was no longer playing defense. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe. To our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. When I walked into the glass conference room, I already knew I was holding the cards. The difference now was, everyone else in that room knew it too. The table was longer than it needed to be, like a runway for egos. At the far end sat Russell, looking like he hadn't slept much. Next to him was Tara, the new head of operations who had delivered the HR verdict like she was handing me a parking ticket. She was flanked by Colin, a legal rep I'd never met before, and someone else who I guessed was from investor relations. They didn't even offer me coffee. I didn't mind. "Marcus," Russell began, standing halfway before sitting again. "Thanks for coming. We appreciate you taking the time." "Appreciate is a funny word," I said, dropping my bag and calmly pulling out a single folder. "Considering last week you cut my pay by 50% without a conversation." Tara cleared, her throat already going defensive. "To clarify, Marcus, that was part of a broader company-wide restructuring." "No, it wasn't," I interrupted. "Because I spoke to 3 other engineers yesterday. None of them took a pay cut. So if this was a broader restructuring, it somehow only applied to me." Russell raised a hand. "Let's not start this combative. We're here to resolve, not escalate." I nodded, slowly flipping open the folder. "Good, because I have something that needs resolution." I slid a copy of the patent filing across the table. Not the provisional one. The full final patent registered to Reid Tech LLC, time-stamped 7 months before my first paycheck from Noventa. All 5 people leaned in to read it. Colin, the lawyer, was the first to speak. "This is unexpected." "It shouldn't be," I said. Russell and I discussed the sensor's origins during my onboarding. I was upfront about it. He said legal would follow up on transferring the IP. They never did, so the ownership remained mine. Tara narrowed her eyes. "But you developed and refined the sensor as part of your work here. Doesn't that make it company property?" "Not unless you've retroactively signed me into a time machine," I said. The foundational framework was complete before I joined. What I did at Noventa was optimize it. Yes, but all built off a system and structure that was mine. The core functions outlined in this patent are embedded into every product you've shipped. Russell leaned back. "So, what are you saying? Marcus? That you want royalties?" I met his gaze. I want a conversation, not a salary gutting, not legal threats. A real conversation about equity, respect, and ownership. Colin quietly began flipping through a thick binder of documents he'd brought. He was already on defense. I didn't need to say the next part, but I did anyway, because I wanted them to hear it out loud. Let me spell it out, I continued. If I take this to court, I can issue a cease and desist. It would freeze all manufacturing, all sales. It would open your cap table to risk, breach your Series B conditions, and panic your investors. I don't want to do that, but if you treat me like a problem, I'll start acting like one. Silence. Tara looked like she'd swallowed her tongue. Even the guy from Investor Relations started shifting uncomfortably. Russell finally spoke. Look, Marcus, you're right. We dropped the ball, and I owe you an apology for the way this was handled. That HR meeting? That should never have happened without context, without recognition of what you've built here. He glanced at Tara, then at Colin. Let's propose a path forward. Colin adjusted his glasses. We'll need to validate the patent trail, but assuming everything checks out, this does leave us in a vulnerable position. However, if Marcus is open to negotiating a licensing agreement, perhaps with backdated equity or profit sharing, we can resolve this quietly and constructively. I didn't smile. Not yet. Because I'd been here before. Handshakes that never turned into signatures, promises that dissolved once the threat faded. I needed more than words. I want it in writing, I said. Today, a preliminary agreement. And I want oversight. I'm not handing this over to watch you bury it in legal footnotes. Tara bristled. That's a lot of demands for someone who saved this company from a legal firestorm you didn't even see coming, I shot back. You're welcome. Russell held up a hand. She's frustrated, Marcus, but she knows you're right. I stood. I'll give you until end of day. I'm willing to talk. I'm not willing to wait around while you scramble to protect yourself at my expense. If I don't have a term sheet in my inbox by 6 p.m., I go to my lawyer, and then your investors. The room stayed silent as I collected the folder and left. On. The walk back to my car, I didn't feel victorious. I felt sobered. That meeting wasn't the end of a battle. It was the start of one. But at least now, I wasn't fighting blind. I was fighting back. The drive home was a blur. My mind kept racing through that conference room, replaying every word, every expression. I knew I had rattled their cage, but I also knew corporate battles rarely ended with a handshake and a smile. They were about to play hardball. I just had to be ready for it. I barely got inside my apartment before my phone buzzed. An email from Russell. Subject line, next steps. I hesitated before opening it. Was it a truce? A trap? A bluff? I tapped the screen. The email was formal, measured, and full of corporate speak. They acknowledged the validity of my patent claim. The words due diligence and compliance review appeared multiple times. They proposed a meeting with their legal counsel and a representative from the board to discuss potential licensing terms and equity adjustments. But there was a catch buried deep in the legal jargon. The offer was contingent on me signing a strict non-disclosure agreement, NDA, that would limit what I could say publicly about the situation. And there was an implied deadline. If I didn't respond within 72 hours, they would consider all options to protect company interests. I leaned back and let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. The stakes were escalating faster than I expected. The NDA was typical corporate boilerplate. Confidentiality clauses, no disparagement terms, non-compete language that basically fenced me in completely. I wasn't naive enough to think they'd give me free rein to share what I'd uncovered. But still, I felt a pang of frustration. After years of loyalty and sleepless nights, this was the best they could offer? Silence and secrecy in exchange for a slice of the pie? I called my mentor, Dr. Ayers, that evening. His voice crackled through the line, warm but sharp. Marcus, this is classic. They want to bury you in paperwork so they can quietly fix the mess. You've got leverage, but don't let them rush you. Know exactly what you want before you sign anything. And make sure you have a lawyer who understands patent law, not just general corporate contracts. He reminded me that this wasn't just about money. It was about principle. About protecting the innovation I had poured years of my life into. It was about demanding respect where it was due. That night, I drafted a list of my non-negotiables: fair compensation for past use of the patent, equity in future sales, a seat at the product development table, and a guarantee that my name would be formally recognized on all related IP documents. Over the next 2 days, the email exchanges started in earnest. Their legal team sent over an initial draft of the licensing agreement. It was heavily weighted in their favor, as expected. Clauses gave them broad rights to modify the technology without my approval, and the royalty rate was a fraction of what I thought was reasonable. I fired back with a counterproposal, citing industry standards and comparable deals from startups and tech firms. I also requested a clause that would allow me to audit their sales figures annually to ensure transparency. Russell's replies grew noticeably more tense, but still professional. I could sense the unease behind the corporate facade. They knew they were in a vulnerable spot. Meanwhile, word started to leak within Noventa's engineering department. Some colleagues reached out in support, others in hushed warnings. "Be careful," one said. "They don't like loose ends." Another whispered, "You might be making enemies you don't want." The pressure mounted, but I reminded myself why I'd started this fight. Not just for the money, but for the truth and recognition. On the morning of the 4th day, I received an unexpected call. It was from an investor, someone I hadn't met, but who had a vested interest in Noventa's patents and intellectual property portfolio. "Marcus," the voice said, measured and calm. "We've been briefed on the situation. It's complicated. But I want you to know there are people on the board who respect what you've built. This could be a turning point if handled correctly." He didn't offer specifics, but made it clear that the investor community was watching. My fight wasn't just with HR or operations. It was with the entire ecosystem that depended on Noventa's tech. That night, I sat at my desk, the glow of the laptop casting shadows on the walls. I drafted a message to Russell, outlining a final set of terms, emphasizing collaboration and mutual benefit. I was ready to negotiate, but on my terms. The next morning, the reply came. Short, to the point. "Meeting confirmed. Legal and board representatives will be present. Prepare your documentation." I closed the laptop and exhaled slowly. The corporate chess game was shifting from letters and emails to face-to-face confrontation. I was stepping into a new arena. As I prepared my notes, one thing was clear. I was no longer just the engineer who had quietly built a revolutionary sensor. I was now a key player in a high-stakes battle over ownership, respect, and justice. The morning of the big negotiation arrived faster than I expected. I woke up feeling a mix of adrenaline and apprehension. This wasn't just about patents or pay anymore. It was about my reputation, my future, and what it meant to stand up for yourself in a world that often overlooks the little guy. I dressed carefully, opting for a crisp navy blazer and a simple white shirt. Nothing flashy, just professional. Because I wanted my words to be the focus, not my appearance. As I walked into the sleek boardroom, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. The same faces from the last meeting sat around the table, but this time the tension was palpable. Russell was there, looking more guarded, and Tara avoided eye contact. Colin's legal demeanor was sharper than before, and a couple of new faces joined. One was the company's CFO, another a senior board member who looked like they held the real power. I placed my folder down quietly, the weight of those pages reminding me of all the time and energy I'd invested. The patents, the correspondence, the counter-proposals, they were more than just documents. They were proof that I wasn't just a cog in the machine. Russell began. Marcus, thank you for coming again. We want to reach an agreement that works. For all parties. Tara jumped in. We understand your contributions, but we also have obligations to shareholders and employees. The proposed royalties and equity stakes you've requested are unprecedented for someone in your position. I smiled slightly. That's why I'm here, to explain why this isn't a typical case. I walked through the history of the patents, highlighting the timeline, the innovation, and how Noventa's products depended heavily on my technology. I laid out the risks they faced if we didn't come to terms: potential lawsuits, loss of investor confidence, and damage to the company's reputation. The CFO raised an eyebrow. You're painting a dire picture. Are you implying Noventa is at risk of shutting down? Not shutting down, I clarified, but certainly exposed to significant financial and operational disruption. The patents I own are the backbone of your flagship product line. Without a licensing agreement, production would need to halt. The investors would lose millions, and the company's valuation would plummet. The board member leaned forward, folding their hands. And what exactly do you want? I looked around the table, meeting each gaze with steady resolve. Fair compensation for past use, reflecting the revenue your products have generated using my patented tech. A reasonable royalty rate going forward. Equity that reflects my stake in the technology's success. And most importantly, a role in any future decisions regarding this IP. There was a pause. Then Colin, the lawyer, spoke up. These terms are aggressive. If we agree, it sets a precedent for other employees. It could disrupt internal IP policies. I anticipated this. I'm not asking for the moon. I'm asking for what's right. Other employees haven't brought patented inventions that directly fuel company profits. This is unique. Russell interjected, Marcus, we want to work with you, but there's also the matter of goodwill. The team felt blindsided by the way you handled this. I shook my head. I tried to talk before it got to this point. The pay cut ultimatum left me no choice but to protect myself. Tara crossed her arms. Maybe if you'd communicated earlier, we wouldn't be here. I responded firmly. I did communicate, multiple times. I was met with silence or vague promises. The room fell silent again. The senior board member finally spoke. We propose a phased approach. A lower royalty rate initially, increasing as revenues grow, combined with a modest equity grant and a formal recognition of your contributions. It was an olive branch, but far from what I wanted. I pressed, what about oversight and transparency? I want regular audits and a seat at the table for any future developments related to my patents. The board member nodded slowly. That can be discussed. After hours of back and forth, we broke for a brief recess. In the hallway, Tara caught up with me. Look, Marcus, I know this is hard, but we're trying to salvage this without a public spectacle. I looked her in the eyes. Public or private, I'm not going away. I just want what's fair. When we reconvened, Russell presented a revised agreement that improved some terms, but still fell short on a few key points. I took a moment, then made my final offer. I'm willing to accept a royalty rate that starts below industry standards, if it scales with revenue. I'm willing to delay some equity payments if milestones are met. But I won't compromise on transparency or my role in future IP decisions. After a long pause, the CFO nodded. Let's get this drafted. We'll circulate for signatures. I felt a cautious relief but knew the hard work wasn't over. The ink hadn't dried yet, and they could still backtrack. As I left the building that evening, the weight on my shoulders was lighter. I'd turned a corner, gone from being dismissed and threatened to becoming a partner with a voice. But this wasn't just my victory. It was a statement that innovation deserves respect, that employees aren't just replaceable parts, that standing up can change the game. The ink was barely dry on the agreement when the reality of what I'd stepped into hit me full force. Yes, I had secured a deal, one that acknowledged my patents, gave me a share of royalties and even a small equity stake. But that legal victory was only the beginning of a far bigger challenge, one that would test not just my resolve, but my ability to navigate the ruthless world of corporate politics. Walking out of that boardroom felt like I was walking on air, a mix of relief and pride, swelling inside me. I'd taken a stand and won against a company that had tried to diminish my worth. Yet, beneath that surface victory lurked an invisible tension, a storm that was gathering quietly but relentlessly inside Noventa. At first, the reactions from my colleagues were mixed. A handful approached me with quiet congratulations, nods of respect, discreet pats on the back. But many more seemed to retreat, eyes avoiding mine in the hallway, conversations that abruptly ended when I entered the tea room. The office atmosphere subtly shifted. I had become, in the eyes of some, a disruptor or even a threat. Tara, who had once seemed indifferent or mildly antagonistic, suddenly kept a close watch on me. Her smiles were tighter, her tone clipped. Russell, too, maintained his professional demeanor but no longer offered the warm nods or casual greetings that had been part of our interactions before. Colin, the company lawyer who had been so aggressive in the negotiations, was now noticeably more cautious, as if measuring every word before speaking. Then there was the silent threat. One afternoon, after returning from lunch, I found a typed note slipped under my office door. No signature, no indication of who it came from. Just 4 words. Be careful. Not everyone wants this settled. The message sent a chill down my spine. It was a stark reminder that while I'd won the legal battle, I was still very much in a war zone. From that moment on, I knew I had to be vigilant. I started meticulously documenting every interaction, every email, every conversation that related even remotely to my patents or the licensing deal. I wanted to build a clear record in case things took a turn for the worse. I also hired a trusted legal advisor to review all new communications from Noventa, ensuring I wouldn't be blindsided again. Behind the scenes, the company's public relations team was working hard to spin the narrative. Press releases and internal memos emphasized Noventa's commitment to innovation and employee recognition. The message was that Noventa valued its innovators and rewarded contributions generously. But internally, the reality was much messier. The leadership was scrambling to contain the fallout and prevent similar situations from arising in the future. They organized private meetings with key engineers and product developers, reminding them of loyalty, confidentiality agreements, and the importance of company unity. There was a subtle pressure to align with management's stance and not openly support me, the maverick who had shaken the foundation. Despite all this, the licensing agreement began to show its tangible benefits. The first royalty check arrived, a concrete validation of my fight and my worth. Holding that check in my hands, seeing that number in my bank account, felt surreal. It wasn't just money, it was proof that standing up for my rights wasn't just a principle. It was profitable and empowering. But with financial gain came new challenges. The board invited me to participate in product development meetings, acknowledging my ownership of key patents. While this was an opportunity, it also meant heightened scrutiny. Every suggestion I made was analyzed, questioned, or challenged. I was no longer just an employee, I was a stakeholder. And with that came expectations and pressures I hadn't fully anticipated. The senior board member who had shown some support during negotiations began requesting detailed reports and updates about any new innovations related to my patents. Their interest was genuine, but also a reminder that I was now under a microscope, with every move watched closely. There were moments when I felt overwhelmed. The corporate minefield was tricky to navigate, and the stakes were high. More than once, I considered retreating into a quieter role, avoiding confrontation and keeping my head down. But the memory of HR's ultimatum, accept the pay cut or leave, reminded me why I couldn't back down. This fight was bigger than me. It was about respect, fairness, and recognition. In the midst of this tension, a surprising ally appeared. Liam, a senior engineer with a quiet but sharp mind, approached me one afternoon. He said he had long admired my work but had never found the courage to speak up. He proposed a collaboration to enhance some features based on my patented technology, aiming to extend its life cycle and unlock new market opportunities. Liam's support was a welcome relief. Together, we began working on improvements that could keep the product line competitive and innovative. Our progress caught the attention of the board, and I sensed a slow shift in their attitude toward me. Not just grudging acceptance, but respect. Still, I remained cautious. The non-disclosure agreements I'd signed were strict, and I had to carefully navigate what information I could share. Trust was a fragile currency, and any misstep could undo everything. Outside of work, the toll was real. Friends and family didn't always understand the complexity of patents, negotiations, or corporate politics. I found myself explaining over and over why this fight mattered, not just for the money, but for standing up to a system that often sidelines individual contributions. Social media was a tricky place too. I kept my story mostly private, sharing only selective details to inspire others without exposing myself to potential backlash. I wanted the narrative to be one of empowerment and perseverance, not bitterness or revenge. As the months went by, the licensing deal became something of a case study within Noventa. HR even used it as a cautionary tale for handling innovation disputes, ironically recognizing the power of standing firm. Looking back, I realized this journey was about much more than patents or paychecks. It was about challenging a system that often treats innovators as replaceable parts rather than valuable partners. It was about proving that knowledge, courage, and persistence could disrupt even the most entrenched corporate power structures. The key: war wasn't over. Corporate battles rarely are. But I'd won a crucial victory, a statement that even one person, armed with the right facts and unyielding determination, could change the game. The uneasy tension at Noventa began to ease slightly as Liam and I started collaborating on improving the patented technology. Our partnership, born out of mutual respect for each other's skills and the shared goal of pushing innovation forward, became a quiet beacon in the otherwise strained atmosphere. Liam was everything I wasn't in the corporate world: calm, methodical, and deeply diplomatic. His approach to problem-solving complemented my more assertive, risk-taking style. Together, we made a powerful team, combining his technical expertise with my deep understanding of the patent's strategic value. We quickly realized that if we wanted to protect and expand the reach of the technology, we needed more than legal victories. We needed to demonstrate undeniable business value. Our first project was to enhance one of the key features covered by my patents, a feature that had already been a market differentiator, but was beginning to show its age. We brainstormed ways to improve its efficiency and user-friendliness while keeping the core patented innovations intact. Days stretched into late nights, filled with whiteboard sketches, prototype tests, and endless back-and-forth discussions. Word of our collaboration leaked, and the initial skepticism from the leadership slowly turned into cautious optimism. During one product development meeting, the CEO, a usually distant figure, stopped to ask detailed questions about our progress. It was a subtle sign that our work was starting to matter on a higher level. Yet this newfound visibility came with its own pressures. Every suggestion we made was scrutinized. We faced pushback from some entrenched teams who were resistant to change or felt threatened by our influence. Rumors circulated that certain executives were lobbying to limit our impact, fearing that too much innovation might disrupt existing profit streams. Despite these challenges, Liam and I pressed on, driven by the belief that our improvements could revive the product line and secure its future in the market. We knew the stakes were high, not just for us, but for the hundreds of employees whose jobs depended on Noventa's success. To bolster our efforts, we started documenting our development process meticulously. Every enhancement, every test result, every user feedback was logged and analyzed. This documentation served two purposes. It built a solid case for our innovations internally, and it also protected our intellectual property from being co-opted or diluted by others in the company. Outside the office, I spent long hours researching market trends and competitor technologies. I wanted us to stay ahead, to anticipate shifts that could either threaten or create opportunities for our patents. Liam admired my strategic vision, and I valued his technical precision, a balance that proved essential. Our partnership also softened some of the hostility I'd faced earlier. Colleagues who had been wary started to approach me with questions and even offers to help. I realized that demonstrating tangible results was the best way to earn respect in this environment. Talk was cheap, but numbers and prototypes spoke volumes. Meanwhile, the financial rewards began to grow. Royalty checks increased as the enhanced products gained traction in the market. The board started to discuss extending licensing agreements and exploring new applications of the patented technology. But it wasn't just about money. Liam and I shared a deeper purpose: to shift Noventa's culture toward valuing inventors and innovators genuinely. We began advocating for changes in company policies to better protect intellectual property and to create more transparent channels for employees to claim ownership of their work. This advocacy was delicate. We had to tread carefully to avoid triggering resistance or backlash. Still, our efforts caught the attention of HR and legal departments, which surprisingly started to seek our input on revising innovation-related policies. The experience was bittersweet. While I had fought hard to claim my rightful share, I couldn't forget how many others had been silenced or pushed aside before me. I wanted to use my story not only to secure my future, but also to pave a smoother path for those who would come after. In quieter moments, Liam and I talked about the broader implications of our journey. Innovation wasn't just about patents and profits, it was about empowering people, fostering creativity, and building trust. We dreamed of a Noventa where inventors felt valued and could collaborate openly without fear, yet we remained cautious. Corporate politics didn't disappear overnight. Some days were harder than others, with new challenges arising unexpectedly. But our growing alliance and shared vision gave me hope that change was possible. Outside work, I continued to reflect on the journey. The pay cut ultimatum, the fight for patent recognition, the uneasy truce. All these moments shaped who I was becoming. I realized that standing up for yourself in the corporate world wasn't a one-time battle, but an ongoing commitment. As the months went by, Liam and I started preparing to present our progress to the board formally. We wanted to showcase not only the technical improvements, but also the potential market impact and the cultural shift we hoped to inspire. The day of the presentation was nerve-wracking. Sitting in the boardroom filled with senior executives, I felt the weight of expectations and the risk of failure. But as we walked through our slides, shared data, and demonstrated prototypes, I saw nods of approval and interest replacing the usual skepticism. That moment was a turning point. The board agreed to invest more resources into our projects and to explore ways to better support innovation within the company. Walking out of that room, I felt a deep sense of accomplishment, not just for myself, but for all the innovators, whose voices were finally being heard. The road ahead was still uncertain, but Liam and I had proven that alliances, persistence, and vision could change even the most resistant systems. And for the first time since this journey began, I truly believed that Noventa's future, and mine, was brighter than ever. The aftermath of our boardroom presentation marked a subtle but powerful turning point at Noventa. It was clear that the leadership was no longer able to ignore the value of innovation and the critical role that patents, and those who held them, played in the company's future. Yet this shift in focus stirred up new challenges and unspoken tensions beneath the surface. Almost overnight, conversations about innovation culture became a staple at meetings. management started launching initiatives aimed at fostering creativity and encouraging employees to submit ideas. Workshops and brainstorming sessions popped up across departments, heralded as a new era for Noventa. Yet, as encouraging as these changes seemed on paper, the reality was far more complicated. I soon realized that cultural change in a corporate giant was like trying to steer a massive ship. It took time and encountered resistance at every turn. Some leaders genuinely embraced the new vision, championing innovation and celebrating inventors. But others viewed it as a threat to their power or an inconvenient distraction from their bottom-line goals. Liam and I found ourselves navigating a landscape where old rivalries simmered and new alliances formed around the shifting priorities. Our push for stronger patent protections and fairer recognition for creators sparked conversations, but also backlash from certain corners. One senior executive, whose influence had waned with our rising visibility, became a subtle but persistent adversary. He questioned the viability of our projects during budget reviews, challenged our data in meetings, and attempted to rally others to slow down our momentum. It was a reminder that corporate politics were never far from the surface, even when the rhetoric changed. At the same time, other employees began approaching me privately, sharing their frustrations with the previous lack of recognition and opportunities. They expressed cautious hope that things might improve, but warned that the company's bureaucracy was a formidable barrier. Their stories reminded me that our fight was far from over, and that many talented innovators had been overlooked or pushed. Out to strengthen our position, Liam and I intensified efforts to document every success and setback meticulously. We developed clearer metrics to demonstrate how our innovations translated into revenue growth, cost savings, or market expansion. We also started working closely with the legal team to refine the process for protecting new inventions and ensuring inventors received credit and compensation. These steps gradually built trust within some parts of the company, especially among middle management and HR, who saw firsthand the benefits of supporting innovation. Policies began to shift toward greater transparency and fairness, including clearer guidelines on intellectual property ownership and dispute resolution. However, navigating this transformation required a delicate balance. Liam and I learned to communicate not just to the board or technical teams, but also to skeptics and gatekeepers who needed to be convinced that innovation was not just a buzzword, but a vital business strategy. We crafted presentations that addressed financial concerns alongside technical details, highlighting the risks of stagnation and the cost of losing top talent. Outside the office, the personal toll of this ongoing battle was significant. The stress of navigating office politics, the weight of representing fellow inventors, and the constant vigilance required to protect our work left little time for rest. At times, I questioned whether the sacrifices were worth it, especially when setbacks occurred or when I faced overt hostility. Liam's steady presence was invaluable during these moments. He reminded me to focus on the long game and celebrated even small victories. Our partnership had evolved beyond professional collaboration. It became a source of resilience and mutual support. In parallel, I maintained contact with industry, contacts and patent experts outside Noventa, seeking advice and perspectives on how to sustain momentum and avoid pitfalls. These external insights helped me anticipate challenges and explore strategic options, including potential partnerships or alternative routes if internal resistance became too great. One unexpected benefit of our efforts was the gradual empowerment of other inventors within the company. Inspired by our example, more employees came forward to claim ownership of their ideas or to seek support for their projects. This shift sparked a grassroots movement that put additional pressure on leadership to formalize policies and invest in innovation infrastructure. Yet, with growth came complexity. As the number of active patent holders and innovation advocates increased, so did the potential for conflicts and disputes. Liam and I found ourselves mediating between competing teams, helping clarify ownership rights, and negotiating fair agreements. Our roles expanded from inventors to informal arbitrators and culture builders. Throughout this period, I never lost sight of the initial crisis that sparked everything: the ultimatum from HR demanding I accept a 50% pay cut or leave. That moment remained a powerful motivator. It reminded me that fighting for fair treatment wasn't just about me. It was about creating a workplace where talent was respected, compensated fairly, and given room to flourish. By the time a year had passed since our breakthrough presentation, Noventa looked markedly different. The innovation culture initiatives were no longer just programs, but integral to the company's identity. Revenue from new patented products grew steadily, and employee satisfaction surveys reflected increased morale among technical teams. Still, the journey was far from complete. The challenges of sustaining change in a large organization were ongoing. I knew that complacency could quickly reverse gains, and that vigilance was essential. Looking back, I realized that what started as a fight for survival had transformed into a mission to redefine how Noventa viewed its most valuable assets, its people and their ideas. This mission had tested my resilience, expanded my skills, and shaped my vision for what a fair and innovative workplace could be. And though the road ahead promised new hurdles, I was more prepared than ever to face them head-on, with Liam and a growing community of allies by my side. As the cultural shift was slowly taking root, and while Liam and I were gaining traction within the company, an unexpected development was about to change the course of our fight entirely. It began in the most unassuming way: an informal conversation over coffee with a mid-level manager named Clara. She wasn't someone I had worked closely with before, but she had a reputation for being sharp and discreet. Clara reached out after a town hall meeting where the CEO had touted innovation as a core value. She confided in me that she had uncovered some internal documents that didn't quite match what we were being told about patent ownership and licensing agreements. Her curiosity and integrity pushed her to dig a little deeper, and what she found hinted at a far bigger story beneath the surface. Over several meetings, Clara shared with me copies of confidential contracts and correspondence between Noventa and a third-party holding company. The documents showed that some of the key patents, which Liam and I had been fighting to protect and get credit for, were actually registered under this holding company's name, a company controlled by a small group of executives within Noventa itself. This revelation was staggering. It meant that while the company publicly celebrated innovation, internally, the ownership and financial benefits of those innovations were being funneled away from the inventors and even from the company's operational budgets into an opaque entity. Essentially, this holding company was siphoning off the value of our work, leaving us and many others with little to show for the patents we created. My mind raced. This wasn't just about a pay cut or even recognition anymore. This was about systemic injustice and corporate manipulation on a scale I hadn't fully grasped before. I knew that exposing this truth could shake Noventa to its core, but it was also terrifying. This was no small allegation. We were talking about potentially illegal or at least unethical financial practices. Whistleblowing at this level could mean lawsuits, career risks, and retaliation, not just for me, but for Clara and others who might get involved. I brought this information to Liam immediately. His reaction was a mix of shock and resolve. We both understood that this was the pivotal moment, one where we could either back down or step into the unknown and fight for what was right. Our first step was to gather more evidence, carefully and quietly. Clara had access to more documents, and insiders willing to talk under the condition of anonymity. Over weeks, we compiled a comprehensive dossier that not only confirmed the existence of the holding company, but also traced financial flows, patent registrations, and licensing deals. Simultaneously, we began reaching out to trusted legal advisors who specialized in intellectual property and corporate governance. Their guidance was crucial in understanding the potential ramifications and in shaping a strategy that balanced assertiveness with prudence. In the meantime, I started to reflect deeply on the nature of the fight we were in. This was no longer just about personal survival or a better paycheck. It was about exposing a hidden structure that undermined innovation and fairness company-wide. I also realized that this could be an opportunity to create lasting change, not just at Noventa, but as a precedent for how corporations should treat inventors and their intellectual property. It was the kind of challenge that could define a career or end one abruptly. Liam and I prepared ourselves mentally for what was coming. We discussed the possibility of going public with the information, the risks of litigation, and the importance of rallying internal allies. We needed a coalition, people within the company who believed in transparency and justice. The stakes were high, but the potential rewards were even greater. If we succeeded, it would mean reclaiming ownership of the innovations, fair compensation for inventors, and a corporate culture rooted in integrity. If we failed, it could mean exile or worse. Meanwhile, the atmosphere inside Noventa began to shift again. The leadership sensed growing unrest and were quick to launch PR campaigns emphasizing their commitment to innovation and fairness. Yet, we knew these were distractions. Behind the scenes, there were whispered warnings. A few close calls reminded me that powerful interests were watching. One evening, I found my office computer had been remotely accessed without my knowledge. It was a chilling reminder that corporate espionage was real and that our opponents had significant resources. Despite these pressures, Clara, Liam, and I remained steadfast. We set a date to present our findings to the board, this time armed with undeniable proof and a clear demand for accountability. On that day, the room was thick with tension. Executives who had once dismissed us sat silently as we laid out the evidence. Faces shifted from disbelief to anger to resignation. The CEO, who had once offered the pay cut ultimatum, avoided eye contact. In that moment, I felt the weight of every inventor who had been overlooked or exploited. This was for them. The board was forced to acknowledge the issues and agreed to an independent audit and an overhaul of patent ownership policies. It was a victory hard-won and long overdue. We left the room. I knew the fight was far from over, but the tides had turned, and so had I. The board meeting where we revealed the hidden patent ownership was undeniably a turning point, but it was just the beginning of an even more complex phase. Rebuilding trust within Noventa and laying down new foundations for how innovation would be nurtured going forward. In the days following the meeting, the company was awash with tension and uncertainty. Rumors swirled in the hallways, and the press caught wind of the upheaval. Though no official statements were released, whispers of an internal investigation and possible leadership changes floated through the grapevine. For many employees, it was a moment of reckoning, a chance to hope for a fairer, more transparent workplace, or fear the chaos that change often brings. Liam and I found ourselves thrust into unexpected roles. We were no longer just inventors or advocates. We had become representatives of a movement demanding justice and systemic reform. Suddenly, colleagues from various departments reached out, some with words of encouragement, others with concerns about job security or the company's future. One of the biggest challenges was managing expectations. Many hoped for swift resolutions, immediate policy changes, instant compensation adjustments, and a corporate culture transformed overnight. But we knew from experience that real change was a slow and painstaking process, requiring patience, strategic thinking, and often compromise. We also had to tread carefully in engaging with company leadership. While the board had agreed to an independent audit and promised reforms, their eagerness to close ranks and move past the scandal was palpable. A few executives privately expressed frustration that the issue had gone public and worried about potential legal repercussions. Recognizing this, Liam and I sought to bridge the gap between innovation advocates and management. We proposed forming a cross-functional innovation committee that included inventors, legal experts, HR representatives, and senior leadership. The goal was to create a transparent forum where policies could be reviewed, new ideas evaluated fairly, and inventors' rights protected. To build momentum, we organized a series of workshops and town halls, inviting employees to share their experiences, voice concerns, and brainstorm solutions. These sessions revealed how deeply the prior culture of secrecy and control had stifled creativity and bred mistrust. One memorable moment was during a workshop when an engineer who had quietly worked at Noventa for over a decade shared how he had once been pressured to sign away his patent rights in exchange for a modest bonus. His story resonated with many and underscored the urgent need for clear, equitable policies. Meanwhile, the independent audit proceeded, conducted by a respected, external firm specializing in intellectual property and corporate ethics. Their findings validated our concerns, uncovering not only misallocated patent ownership, but also systemic lapses in how the company managed innovation, lack of transparency, inadequate inventor recognition, and convoluted licensing agreements. The SAI report's recommendations formed the blueprint for the company's new innovation framework. Clear patent ownership policies favoring inventors, transparent royalty distribution systems, regular training on intellectual property rights, and the establishment of a dedicated innovation office. As these reforms were announced and implemented, Liam and I were appointed to advisory roles within ME, the new innovation office. It was an opportunity to shape the future we had fought so hard for and ensure that the mistakes of the past would not be repeated. On a personal level, this period was both rewarding and exhausting. The transition demanded long hours, delicate negotiations, and constant communication. I often reflected on how far we had come, from being threatened with a 50% pay cut to now influencing company-wide reform. Yet, even as progress was made, challenges remained. Some longtime executives resisted change, subtly undermining initiatives or slowing down approvals. Certain policies, though well-intentioned, were difficult to enforce across Noventa's sprawling global operations. And the scars of mistrust ran deep, requiring ongoing effort to rebuild relationships and foster a genuine culture of respect. Outside the company, our story attracted attention in the industry. I was invited to speak at conferences about intellectual property rights and corporate innovation ethics. Liam and I collaborated with other corporations and advocacy groups to promote fair treatment of inventors nationwide. These experiences broadened my perspective, reinforcing the importance of transparency, collaboration, and empowering creators. I realized that what had begun as a personal fight had grown into a mission to change the way innovation was valued and protected everywhere. Reflecting back, the crisis that started with HR's ultimatum was a catalyst, not just for career survival, but for transformation. It forced me to confront uncomfortable truths, forge alliances, and develop resilience. Most importantly, it underscored that standing up for what's right can inspire change far beyond oneself. As Noventa embarked on this new chapter, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead would have obstacles, but armed with lessons learned, a supportive community, and a commitment to fairness, I was ready to help lead the way. As the months passed and the reforms at Noventa began to take shape, I often found myself reflecting on the incredible personal cost this entire ordeal had taken. What started with a simple, harsh ultimatum from HR to accept a 50% pay cut or leave soon escalated into a full-blown battle against powerful interests entrenched deep within the company. The story that many outside would see as a triumph was, beneath the surface, a struggle marked by sacrifice, uncertainty, and moments of deep vulnerability. At the start, I thought I was prepared for the challenge. I had always considered myself resilient and capable of standing my ground. But nothing truly prepares you for the emotional roller coaster that comes with taking on an entire corporate machine. The daily grind of meetings, confidential investigations, and tense negotiations tested my patience and fortitude in ways I hadn't anticipated. I began to realize that the fight wasn't just about correcting a wrong. It was about navigating the complex human dynamics, politics, and fears that underpin every organization. The tension at work was palpable. I noticed some colleagues pulling away, unsure whether to trust me or distance themselves for their own protection. Gossip swirled like wildfire, and the line between ally and adversary became blurred. It was lonely at times. Friends and family, though supportive, expressed worry about how the ongoing battle might affect my mental health and financial stability. Their concerns were not unfounded. There were days when I felt the weight of it all pressing down on me like a physical burden. Sleepless nights became routine. Anxiety crept in during quiet moments. I questioned if I had made the right decision. Was it worth risking my career, my reputation, and my peace of mind? What if I lost everything and nothing changed? These doubts were the darkest parts of the journey, and overcoming them required an inner strength I hadn't realized I possessed. Yet, amidst the uncertainty, there was a deep sense of purpose that kept me moving forward. The injustice I'd uncovered wasn't just about me or Liam. It was about every innovator who had been silenced or shortchanged by a system that prioritized profits over people. Remembering that larger mission helped me focus beyond my personal fears. Each small victory, whether it was gaining support from a colleague or seeing policy changes take shape, felt like a beacon in the fog. Resilience, I learned, is more than just enduring hardship. It's about adapting, finding new ways to cope, and building a support system. I began leaning heavily on a few trusted mentors who had navigated corporate conflicts before. Their guidance was invaluable. They reminded me to keep perspective, to choose my battles wisely, and to communicate with clarity and calm. One of the biggest pressures I faced was the unspoken expectation to stay silent or conform. Corporate cultures often reward compliance and discourage confrontation. I received subtle warnings from some executives, thinly veiled threats that playing the game was necessary for career survival. But I realized that true leadership meant having the courage to challenge the status quo and stand by your principles, even when it was uncomfortable. Interestingly, this difficult journey revealed an unexpected source of strength: allies I never anticipated. Beyond Clara and Liam, who had been my closest collaborators from the start, more employees began to come forward. They shared their stories of being pressured, overlooked, or undervalued. Slowly, a grassroots movement emerged within Noventa, people who were tired of being ignored and ready to demand fairness. Their courage fueled my resolve and helped me see that I wasn't fighting alone. To harness this collective energy, I helped organize forums and workshops where employees could safely share their experiences and ideas for change. These gatherings revealed how deeply the old culture had eroded trust and creativity. It was clear that policy changes were necessary, but not sufficient. Real transformation had to come from rebuilding relationships and fostering transparency at every level. Outside work, I realized the importance of taking care of myself. The stress wasn't just professional. It seeped into my personal life, affecting my health and well-being. I recommitted to old hobbies that brought me joy, like hiking and painting. I set firm boundaries around work hours, refusing to let the battle consume every waking moment. And importantly, I sought therapy, a decision that helped me process the emotional weight and build resilience from within. After nearly a year of relentless effort, the landscape at Noventa was changing. The new patent ownership policies were formalized, with clearer protections for inventors. Royalty payments that had once been withheld or delayed began flowing fairly to those who deserved them. The creation of an innovation office staffed by people genuinely invested in fairness marked a new chapter. The company also launched an internal recognition program to celebrate inventors and their achievements, something unimaginable before the scandal. Despite these successes, I understood that progress was neither perfect nor complete. Some longtime executives resisted change, working behind the scenes to slow down reform. Enforcement of new policies proved difficult across Noventa's vast global operations. And even with better rules, the scars of mistrust lingered, requiring ongoing effort to heal and rebuild culture. Through it all, I found my own definition of success shifting. It was no longer about salary or titles, but about creating impact and leaving a legacy. That became my North Star, a vision of a workplace where creativity was nurtured, fairness upheld, and innovators empowered to thrive. Sharing this part of my story, I want to acknowledge a truth that is often overlooked. Standing up for what's right comes at a price. But that price can be softened by resilience, community, and purpose. It takes courage to keep going when the path is steep and the outcome uncertain. And that courage is what transforms challenges into opportunities. For anyone facing similar battles, whether in the workplace or elsewhere, know that you are not alone. Seek support from allies, prioritize your well-being, and remember your reasons for fighting. The road may be hard, but the reward of integrity, justice, and meaningful change is worth every sacrifice. As I looked ahead, I felt ready to meet whatever challenges awaited. The fight for fairness and innovation was bigger than me. It was a legacy I was honored to help build, step by step, with resilience and heart. When the dust began to settle after the initial shockwaves of my confrontation with Noventa's HR and upper management, I realized that the battle I thought I was fighting alone was actually part of a much larger story. The process of exposing the truth about the patents and the ownership had opened a door that revealed a hidden network of employees, innovators, and even former executives who had faced similar struggles but had stayed silent for fear of retaliation or simply because they didn't know how to fight back. What started as a personal crusade soon turned into a collective movement. I found that many colleagues, some of whom I barely knew or had only interacted with in passing, began reaching out to me in private messages, emails, or whispered conversations in hallways. They shared their own experiences of being marginalized or ignored when it came to intellectual property, their contributions watered down or erased by corporate policies designed to benefit only a select few. Their stories were strikingly similar to mine, each one a thread in the fabric of an unjust system. One of the most surprising things was discovering that some of these voices came from unexpected places. There were mid-level managers who had quietly advocated for fairness behind closed doors, but felt powerless to challenge the status quo. There were senior engineers who had grown disillusioned over the years, watching their innovations generate millions for the company while they struggled to make ends meet. And there were even former employees who had left Noventa frustrated and defeated, but whose insights proved invaluable in understanding how deep the problems went. As these stories converged, it became clear that the issue was not just about patents or pay cuts. It was about corporate culture and the way power was wielded. The entrenched hierarchy thrived on keeping knowledge and influence tightly controlled, and anyone who dared to question it was labeled a troublemaker. This culture bred fear, mistrust, and silence, until now. Recognizing the potential for change, I began organizing informal meetings, sometimes after work, sometimes on weekends, where employees could gather to share their stories, exchange advice, and build solidarity. We called ourselves the Innovators Circle, a nod to our shared passion for creativity and our commitment to reclaiming the respect we deserved. These meetings were transformative, not just strategically, but emotionally. People who had felt isolated and powerless found a community that understood their struggles and believed in their value. The circle grew quickly. What began as a handful of people expanded to dozens, and then hundreds, as word spread. We created encrypted online forums to discuss ideas safely and anonymously when needed. We drafted letters and petitions, calling on Noventa's leadership to implement fair policies and protect inventors' rights. We shared resources on legal rights, negotiation tactics, and mental health support, knowing that the fight was as much psychological as it was legal. This community became my lifeline. Whenever I faced setbacks or felt overwhelmed by the scale of the opposition, the encouragement from fellow innovators reminded me why this mattered. We celebrated small victories together. A successful negotiation here, a public statement from HR there, a recognition of an inventor's work. These moments of progress fueled hope and determination. But building this network was not without challenges. Management soon became aware of our growing presence and responded with a mix of intimidation and co-optation. Some leaders tried to discredit us by labeling the group as disruptive or unprofessional. Others attempted to infiltrate meetings with company spies or to sow division by pitting members against one another. It was a reminder that change, especially in powerful institutions, is never easy. We learned to navigate these threats carefully. Privacy and trust became paramount. We developed codes of conduct and clear communication protocols to ensure that the group remained focused and united. Transparency within the circle was balanced by discretion to protect members from retaliation. Our strength came from solidarity and shared purpose. One of the most powerful moments came when a senior executive, someone who had remained silent during much of the controversy, reached out to me privately. She admitted that she had long been troubled by the company's handling of patents, but felt constrained by the corporate ladder and fear of losing her position. Encouraged by our growing movement, she decided to become an ally, using her influence to advocate for reform from within. Her support gave us a new voice in the boardroom and lent credibility to our cause. This alliance demonstrated that change often requires collaboration between insiders and outsiders, the brave and the cautious. It showed that even in environments resistant to change, cracks can form when enough people come together with conviction and courage. Looking back, I realized that the power of community was one of the greatest lessons from this journey. No matter how talented or determined an individual is, systemic issues require collective action. The Innovators' Circle became a symbol of hope, not just a rebellion, but a movement toward a fairer, more transparent, and more respectful workplace. For anyone facing a similar fight, my advice is simple but vital. Build your community. Find your allies, share your story, listen to others, and recognize that you are stronger together. There is immense power in connection, in shared experiences, and in collective courage. The road ahead for Noventa remains long and uncertain, but thanks to this unexpected network of allies, I no longer feel alone in the struggle. Together, we are shaping a future where innovation is celebrated and inventors are honored, not silenced or sidelined. The path is difficult, but with community, resilience, and hope, transformation is possible. With the momentum of the Innovators' Circle behind me and allies quietly rallying within the company's upper ranks, it became clear that it was time for a strategic shift. The emotional weight of the battle was heavy, but now I had to focus. On the practical, how could we turn the company's own legal framework and patent system into a lever for real change? How could I take back what was rightfully ours, without simply burning bridges or risking total career destruction? The patents were the key. They weren't just documents locked away in a legal vault. They represented tangible assets, intellectual property that had helped Noventa grow its market share and reputation. And while management tried to claim ownership and sideline the inventors, the reality was more complicated. My research and discussions with patent lawyers showed me that the company's claims were not as ironclad as HR had portrayed. There were loopholes, procedural oversights, and ambiguities in the patent filings, openings we could exploit. First move was to assemble a team. I reached out to trusted colleagues with expertise in legal affairs, intellectual property, and corporate strategy, people who had stayed out of the spotlight but were deeply knowledgeable. Together, we started combing through the patent documents line by line, cross-referencing filing dates, inventor names, and contractual language. This was painstaking work, but every small inconsistency felt like a crack in the fortress. During this process, I uncovered a critical detail that no one else seemed to notice. Several of the patents had been filed under outdated or incomplete contracts that lacked proper assignment clauses. Essentially, this meant that the legal ownership of these patents was contestable. If challenged correctly, the inventors, myself and others, could argue for rightful ownership, or at least negotiate better terms based on our original contributions. Armed with this information, we formulated a plan. Instead of launching an EI, all-out legal battle, which could take years and bankrupt us financially, we opted for a negotiation strategy backed by firm evidence. Our goal was not to destroy the company, but to compel it to recognize the inventor's rights and provide fair compensation, royalties, and protections against unilateral pay cuts or dismissals. I drafted a formal letter to Noventa's legal department, outlining our findings and proposing a meeting to discuss revised patent ownership agreements. The letter was firm but professional, emphasizing the mutual benefits of cooperation and the risks of prolonged litigation. I sent copies to HR, senior management, and the board members we had contacts with, ensuring maximum visibility. The response was immediate and mixed. On one hand, there was clear resistance. Some executives doubled down on their initial stance, accusing me of betrayal and threatening termination. On the other hand, others reached out discreetly, curious and perhaps anxious about what this revelation could mean for the company's future. The tension in the air was palpable. To strengthen our position, the Innovators Circle organized workshops and presentations showcasing the inventor's contributions, not just legally, but economically and innovatively. We highlighted how our work had generated new product lines, opened markets, and driven revenue growth. These presentations were circulated internally and eventually leaked to some industry insiders and journalists sympathetic to employee rights. The external pressure added another layer of urgency to the negotiations. Meanwhile, I made sure to document every interaction meticulously. Emails, meeting notes, recorded calls, all became part of a growing dossier that would protect us if negotiations broke down. The combination of transparency and preparedness became our shield. At the negotiating table, I adopted a tone that balanced assertiveness with diplomacy. I acknowledged the company's investments and risks, but underscored the necessity of respecting inventors' rights. The conversation was tough. There were moments when tempers flared, when veiled threats surfaced, and when it seemed like the talks might collapse altogether. But we held firm. The turning point came when I presented a detailed proposal for a new patent ownership structure, a shared model that granted inventors co-ownership rights, defined clear royalty streams, and included protections against unilateral salary reductions tied to patent contributions. The proposal also recommended the establishment of an internal oversight committee with inventor representation, a move that would increase transparency and trust. This proposal resonated with some members of the board who were concerned about the company's reputation and long-term innovation potential. Slowly, a new dialogue emerged, one that focused on partnership rather than conflict. After weeks of intense back and forth, a preliminary agreement was reached to pilot the new model on a select number of patents, including those I had brought to light. The success of this pilot marked a historic shift, not just for me, but for Noventa as a whole. It signaled that inventors could reclaim control over their creations, that corporate giants could be held accountable, and that fairness and innovation were not mutually exclusive. This victory also empowered others within the company to come forward, fueling ongoing reforms. The Innovators Circle grew more influential, and the company began updating policies to better protect intellectual property rights and employee compensation. Reflecting on this phase, I realized that the key to winning wasn't brute force or defiance alone. It was strategy, unity, and leveraging the system's own rules to create leverage. The battle had transformed from a personal fight into a blueprint for others facing similar challenges. This chapter of my story is a testament to the power of knowledge, preparation, and collaboration. If you ever find yourself feeling powerless in a corporate jungle, remember, your voice, your intellect, and your allies can turn the tide, sometimes in the most unexpected ways. After the breakthrough agreement on the patents and the new partnership model between inventors and management was finally secured, I expected a sense of relief, a calm after the storm. But what followed was an entirely different challenge. Rebuilding fractured relationships, healing wounds left by months of conflict, and learning to navigate the unfamiliar terrain of a company culture that was being forced to evolve. The legal victory was undeniably a turning point. It had won us tangible rights and recognition, but it also exposed long-standing fractures in trust and communication between employees and leadership. The damage from months of tension and resistance didn't simply disappear overnight. In many ways, the company was a different place now, and everyone, from executives to new hires, felt that change was inevitable, but uncertain what it would look like. I found myself in a complicated position. Some managers continued to view me as a rebel, a disruptor who had jeopardized company harmony and exposed its vulnerabilities to the public. These relationships were cold and sometimes openly hostile. Others grudgingly accepted that I had been right, yet still kept their distance, wary of crossing the line into full support. I quickly realized that asserting myself as a leader and advocate meant walking a tightrope, balancing assertiveness with diplomacy, pushing for change without alienating key players. To address this, I initiated a series of internal dialogues, workshops and roundtable discussions designed to bring inventors, HR, and management together in a spirit of mutual understanding and respect. These were far from easy sessions. Old wounds and grievances resurfaced, and the air was thick with skepticism. Some participants doubted whether genuine change was possible. Others feared repercussions for speaking openly. But with patience and persistent facilitation, these conversations gradually began to shift mindsets. People started seeing each other, less as adversaries and more as collaborators, all invested in the company's future. Meanwhile, implementing the new patent ownership model required hard, detailed work. The internal oversight committee we had proposed needed to be established, with clear roles and responsibilities for managing patent rights and royalty distribution. We drafted comprehensive guidelines to formalize how inventors would be compensated and recognized going forward. This wasn't just a legal exercise, it was an effort to embed fairness and transparency into the company's DNA. I worked closely with legal advisors, HR personnel, and senior management to ensure that these policies were not only equitable, but also realistic and sustainable for the business. Educating the wider workforce on these complex issues became a priority. Many employees had never stopped to consider the significance of intellectual property rights or how patent ownership impacted their careers and compensation. To bridge this gap, we launched an internal awareness campaign, newsletters, informational, webinars, and open Q&A forums that explained the new policies and the rationale behind them. This initiative helped demystify the legal jargon and created a shared language and understanding around innovation rights, empowering employees to engage more confidently. Outside of the company walls, our story began to attract attention. Industry. Forums and technology blogs picked up on Noventa's unprecedented shift toward honoring inventor rights. Employee advocacy groups lauded our efforts as a step forward for workplace fairness in tech. This external validation fueled a growing sense of pride and purpose among many employees. It also put additional pressure on the company's leadership to continue on this path of reform. What started as my personal fight had unexpectedly blossomed into a movement influencing corporate culture far beyond Noventa. On a deeply personal level, this journey transformed my own understanding of leadership. I came to appreciate that being a leader is not just about technical expertise or innovation. It's about courage, resilience, and the ability to bring people together around a common cause. The months of negotiation, setbacks, and tense discussions had taught me the value of strategic patience. Change is a marathon, not a sprint, and sometimes the most important victories are those that happen quietly, behind the scenes. Financially, the new patent agreements brought mixed results at first. The royalties and compensations agreed upon did not immediately compensate for the pay cut I had been forced to reject, nor did they erase the stress endured. However, this new structure laid a foundation, a precedent that recognized inventors' contributions and promised better rewards in the future. As more inventors stepped forward and the model expanded across the company's portfolio, the financial benefits grew steadily, validating our efforts. Perhaps most importantly, the renewed commitment to intellectual property rights sparked a renaissance in innovation within Noventa. Knowing their ideas and efforts would be fairly recognized and rewarded, inventors felt re-energized. They took greater ownership of projects, pushed boundaries, and filed new patents at a higher rate than ever before. The company's product pipeline flourished, and Noventa's reputation as a leader in technological innovation solidified. What once was seen as a threat to the company's control turned into a catalyst for growth and collaboration. Reflecting on this chapter, I realized that the HR ultimatum, the demand to accept a 50% pay cut or leave, was more than just a painful crossroads for me personally. It was a catalyst that exposed systemic flaws in how companies treat intellectual property and employee contributions. It sparked a movement that redefined what ownership, respect, and fairness look like in a corporate environment. If there's one enduring lesson from this story, it's that no situation is truly hopeless. Even when the odds feel overwhelming, armed with knowledge, allies, and perseverance, you can carve a path forward. Standing up for your rights doesn't just help you, it can uplift an entire community of creators and innovators. The road ahead remains challenging. Corporate culture doesn't change overnight, and new policies require ongoing vigilance and advocacy to be enforced effectively. But with a foundation built on transparency, respect, and collaboration, there's hope that Noventa and other companies inspired by this story can become places where innovation and fairness truly coexist. The journey that began with a stark ultimatum, accept a 50% pay cut or leave, has now come full circle. What initially seemed like a battle for personal survival evolved into a powerful story about justice, recognition, and the true value of innovation in the workplace. Reflecting on everything that has happened, I realize this experience was much more than a fight over money or patents. It was a transformation, not only of myself, but also of the company culture and, I hope, the broader industry. The weeks and months following the heated dispute over the patents and my compensation were filled with uncertainty and tension. There were moments when I questioned whether this new path toward fairness and respect would endure, or if it was merely a temporary fix to quell dissent. Would company leadership truly maintain its commitment to recognizing inventors and respecting their rights? Would the corporate culture evolve, or would it revert to old habits of undervaluing the very people who created its most valuable assets? Over time, it became clear that real change was taking root. The company embraced a new model that not only recognized inventors' rights, but also rewarded them fairly. This was a monumental shift, one that required buy-in from top executives, HR, legal teams, and everyday employees. Change like this rarely happens overnight or without resistance, but when it's rooted in shared values and collective determination, it builds a strong foundation that withstands setbacks and skepticism. One of the most important lessons I've taken from this experience is the undeniable power of standing firm on your principles. When HR presented the ultimatum, a 50% pay cut or leave, it felt like a corner had been painted around me. Accepting meant sacrificing my worth and the value of my work. Walking away risked financial insecurity and career uncertainty. But I realized that capitulating would have meant undermining everything I had built and believed in. So, despite the fear and pressure, I chose to fight. This was about more than money. It was about integrity, respect, and the future of innovation itself. Intellectual property, the patents I helped create, are the lifeblood of tech companies like Noventa. If inventors aren't recognized or fairly compensated, the whole system suffers. Innovation stagnates, morale dips, and talented creators leave. This story proved how crucial it is for companies to build environments that honor creativity and protect the rights of their people. It's not just ethical, it's essential for long-term success. Another key insight is the power of preparation and knowledge. I didn't enter this battle blindly or impulsively. I spent countless hours studying patent laws, employee rights, and corporate policies. I gathered documentation, built evidence, and sought advice from legal experts and colleagues. Being informed gave me the confidence and credibility needed to challenge the status quo. Knowledge truly is power, especially when confronting entrenched corporate bureaucracy. Building a network of allies was also vital. I wasn't alone in this fight. Other inventors who had faced similar challenges stepped forward, managers sympathetic to fairness lent their support, and legal counsel helped frame our case. Together, our voices were louder and impossible to ignore. No matter how strong your convictions, change is often a team effort. Find your allies, share your story, and lean on each other. Rebuilding trust within the company was a slow but meaningful process. Winning the fight over patents and compensation was just one step. Healing fractured relationships, changing mindsets, and fostering a culture of respect took time and patience. We organized workshops, town halls, and open dialogues, not just about policies, but about empathy, understanding, and shared goals. It was an opportunity for everyone to reflect on how to create a more inclusive, transparent workplace where every contribution is valued. Financially, the new patent compensation model started as a modest step forward, but it was a clear signal that inventors could finally see tangible rewards for their hard work. This change sparked a new energy across Noventa. People felt motivated to innovate more boldly because their efforts would be recognized, not just with words, but with real pay and respect. Fair compensation is not a luxury. It's a vital motivator that fuels creativity and loyalty. Beyond Noventa, this story resonates in the wider corporate world. More companies are facing scrutiny over how they treat creators and employees. Workers today expect transparency, fairness, and respect, especially when their ideas and inventions drive profits. Organizations that adapt and prioritize ethical treatment of their teams are positioning themselves for lasting success in a competitive, global market. On a personal level, this experience reshaped my understanding of success. It's no longer about individual accolades or climbing the corporate ladder. True success means making a positive difference, changing systems, empowering others, and leaving a legacy of fairness and integrity. Leadership isn't a privilege, reserved for a few. It's a responsibility to stand up for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable or risky. Looking ahead, I'm optimistic. Noventa remains committed to ongoing improvements, regularly revisiting policies based on employee feedback and industry best practices. We've become a case study other companies look to for how to navigate intellectual property fairly. This momentum could ignite a larger movement, redefining how innovation is rewarded across industries worldwide. For anyone watching this story unfold, whether you're an inventor, an employee, or just someone who cares about fairness, remember this. Change starts with courage. Don't be afraid to speak up when something feels wrong. Educate yourself. Build community. Progress might be slow and challenging, but it's always worth it. If I could offer one final piece of advice, it's this. Don't let fear or doubt silence your voice. Your contributions matter. Your fight for fairness paves the way for others. The path is tough, but the destination, a workplace where creativity and respect go hand in hand, is worth every challenge. Thank you for following this journey. If this story has touched or inspired you, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Subscribe to the channel for more stories about resilience, justice, and transformation. Together, we can build a future where innovation thrives, and fairness is the foundation. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.